Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated, their senior NBA writer, back on the program. Always great to see you, Chris. Let me start with the All-Star game. Is there any fallout from how bad that basketball was? Is there anything you could do, or the commissioner or the Players Association are going to say, you know what, let's make this something a little bit more appealing?
I think there will be attempts, Dan, next season to modify the game once again. I think something that's on the table right now is a USA versus the world type of game, which would be kind of the latest incarnation of what this game has been. I think there's been and there will continue to be conversations about upping the financial incentive to winners of this game. We saw that work to some effect with making the in-season tournaments a little bit more competitive. I think the NBA is going to try that. But when I think of the All-Star game, Dan, I'm reminded of something that the great Larry Merchant, who covered boxing so many years for HBO, once said about boxing, and that's you can't save it and you can't kill it. And that's kind of how I feel about the All-Star game. I don't think it's going to get appreciably better because today's NBA players simply don't care about it. And it's never going to go away because regardless of what people like you and me think about it, it's still going to draw between 5 and 7 million viewers every single year, which would be the equivalent of the highest rated regular season game that the NBA has.
I suggested yesterday, just offhand, how about the first team to 200? So there is some kind of incentive, or that, you get to 200, you win the game.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of similar to what they did with the Elam ending, right? Where they, put a score up there and said whoever gets that score first wins, which is great at the end of games, but doesn't do a heck of a lot making it more interesting in the very beginning. I think what made this past All-Star game so much worse is that in years past it's been that bad. It hasn't been 200 points for one team, record scoring bad, but it's been a bad game. It's been salvaged to a certain degree by the fact that the last few minutes were competitive, that you had guys for at least 5 minutes during that game competing like it was an actual game. This game didn't have that because it was out of hand, really by the start of the second half, and there was no competitive fourth quarter. So all the NBA can hope for, I think, moving forward is that the game stays close enough that we get some of those moments down the stretch where we had, a year ago when it was Jason Tatum versus Jaylen Brown, who are on opposite teams. Maybe you get Luka, versus Giannis on opposite teams. I think that's the best the NBA can hope for at the All-Star game.
And I would love, the rest of the world versus the United States. But let's say I did that this year. Who are you taking? If I give you the world, or you take the players from the United States?
I don't know, Dan. Like, one of the conversations I've had with league people about that is, while there's a natural inclination to believe that would make the game more competitive, right? Like if you're competing for your country and you're competing for the world, It has sort of an Olympic style vibe to it. The problem is the two guys that were the most indifferent to the All-Star game were Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic. Like, they could not have cared less about the outcome of that game. Jokic was just there trying to do windmills at the end. Luka took a 75-footer in the second quarter. He went for a 2-for-1 at the end of the second quarter from 75 feet away. These are not guys that are acting serious about that game. And I'm not criticizing them for it. If I'm Luka and I'm Jokic and I just want to relax over All-Star weekend, that's kind of how I would treat it. But I don't think getting, the best of Europe and Asia together on one team is going to suddenly get the motivational and competitive juices of Luka and Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, but it can't hurt. Okay? So I think you have to look at these and say, all right, I think that they would play harder because it's us against the NBA, the United States. So you would get Canada, and then you would get the rest of the world, and I would take the rest of the world versus players from born in America.
Yeah, in a vacuum, yes, I would probably do that. And I think it could create some interesting storylines going into the game and some fun narratives. But Dan, I've never known you to be this kind of wide-eyed optimist to think that it would suddenly make these guys care about the outcome of the game. I think the only thing that would make these guys care is if, like, some gambling outfit came in and offered, $3 million for a player for the winner.
Yeah, but
and
fans,
even that I'm not sure.
Fans would hate that we have to incentivize you for playing in an all-star game. No,
Dan, which brings me back to the original point.
Right.
You can't kill it and you can't save it. It's going to be exactly what it's going to be.
LeBron said that, hey, let's let Bronny be a kid and back off here. But he did say at one point, a month ago, that Bronny could play for the Lakers right now. And then I started to wonder about that comment by LeBron. Was he hyping his son, or was he saying to Laker management, this is how bad we are? I'm trying to figure out, because you know how passive-aggressive LeBron is, but now he's saying, hey, maybe he hadn't lived up to your expectations and the mock drafts. Let's just let him be a kid. But LeBron has hyped his own son right before our very eyes.
I think it's a little bit of both. That, off the cuff comment about how Bronny could play in the NBA right now. When it was said at the time, the Lakers were still going through a process where they weren't very good, and there were opportunities for that team to get better via trade. And we know that LeBron's done that often. He did that with the hourglass, tweet, just before the trade deadline. He is constantly putting pressure on the front offices of the teams that he plays for. The problem I have with LeBron posting about everybody should kind of back off Bronny and let the kid play is to your point, he's the one that has made the media interest ratchet up to an all-time level. Dan, I'm out in LA a lot now. I've been to half a dozen USC games. I've written about Bronny, 3 or 4 times already, and will continue to over the rest of this college basketball season. I'm only doing that because LeBron has put it out there that not only does he believe Bronny can play in the NBA, but he has put it out there that he wants to play with him. Yeah. So the landscape of the NBA could shift seismically if we're to believe what LeBron said, what was it, a year or so ago, that he wants to play with Bronny. So, for example, if a team like the New York Knicks is in the back half of the first round this year and says, you know what? We've got enough young talent. We've got great depth. Screw it. Let's just use our first-round draft pick, draft Bronny James, and see what that means when it comes to LeBron and him wanting to play with his son. That's the reason the interest is ratcheted up to the level that it is, because LeBron has created that interest. So I think it's disingenuous to be critical of the mock drafters and the reporters that are watching Bronny's every move, because the reality is that LeBron put that spotlight on him by tying his own future to him.
And when I saw the mock drafts, here's Bronny coming back from the heart condition, and he needs a full year and needs to come back. I think people are afraid to say the obvious is Bronny is not an NBA player. He's not even close to it right now. He's, third or fourth best player on his own team here. Is he, by all appearances, a good kid? He knows the game. He, sees the court, can pass, plays defense, but he needs to stay another year. I think when the mock drafts put him in, because then you get more clicks. If you look at these mock drafts, Chris, and I know you have, most of the players are from Europe. Mm-hmm. The top 10 players, you might get a player out of Kentucky, or you might get a player out of Colorado, and everybody else is from overseas here. Put Bronny in a mock draft, and all of a sudden you care. You don't care about some guy from Perth who is French, and he could go second overall. And I think that I think my feeling is mock drafters putting Bronny in did a disservice to him, because he's not an NBA player, certainly right now.
I think there's truth to that, because, last year you could do mock drafts and generate interest because it was the Victor Wembanyama year, and the fascination with him was incredible. This year, I don't think that mock drafters are necessarily throwing him in there because it will generate more web traffic. That's definitely a byproduct of it, but they're doing what I'm doing and talking to a lot of college scouts and asking every single day, is this kid getting better? What is his draft potential? If he was on the board when you drafted, say, in the second round, would you take a flyer on him? Dan, I agree with you. I am not a draftnik, but I've seen a lot of Bronny this year.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, he is not an NBA player. I think he has the potential to become one because I do think he has elite defensive skills. And I think he is a pretty good playmaker who, if given more time, can develop a more consistent three-point shot. But he is probably a full year away from developing that shot. And quite frankly, Dan, he should be. He had a near cardiac event. He had a cardiac event near death over the summer. It took him 4 months to get back on the basketball court. He was on a minutes restriction really throughout the month of January. So it's not unusual at all that he is slowly developing in his first year. The best thing he could possibly do, I think, it's been made easier because he can make a lot of money staying in college now, is to stay in school, keep developing, and then going into next year, let's see where he is. Because I do believe that he can develop into a first-round pick with one more year of seasoning.
Yeah, I get it. And, I understand it. But LeBron put a spotlight or, a brighter spotlight on his son and didn't let him just be a kid when you mentioned he could play for the Lakers. Before I let you go, at what point will we buy into the Clippers being legitimate?
I think we have to already be there. They've had a little bit of a blip since the All-Star break with their defense, but I'm not overly concerned with that. I was talking to some Clippers people actually over the weekend about, what makes them a little bit different this year. And the obvious answer is health, right? I mean, Kawhi and Paul George missed a bunch of time last year. They haven't this season. A lot of talk about the MVP conversation right now. I think Kawhi should be squarely in it and be more in the conversation because of how he's played and how good that team has been since a slow start. But the real reason, Dan, that we should take this team more seriously is James Harden. I mean, that's the reality of it. I had questions about James Harden coming into this situation with the Clippers. I thought he might be a little bit too me first going into a really important contract year. He has been the opposite of that. He has been a facilitator from day one. He's taken a lot of pressure off of Kawhi and off of Paul George, allowing them to just be finishers and not have to worry about, playmaking and being an assist guy, during games this season. There was a great stat somebody brought to my attention over there. He has made the Clippers the ultimate closers, right? And this was as recently as a couple of games ago, but they were 31-1 in games that they led going into the fourth quarter. And that they attribute a lot of to James Harden, his ability to take over games with his playmaking and later round down the stretch with his shot. He has had just an overwhelmingly positive impact on the Clippers. And I think that's raised them to a level they haven't been in years past. Because, Dan, they have been searching for years for a point guard. How many point guards have they cycled through over the last 5 years? They brought in Rajon Rondo. They brought in John Wall. They brought in Russell Westbrook. They have been looking for somebody to claim this position. James Harden's done that, and he's made them so much better.
Yeah, I go back to Pooh Richardson. They've been looking for it. Great to talk to you again, bud.
You got it, Dan.
Thank you, Chris. That's Chris Mannix, senior NBA writer for Sports Illustrated. Take a break. Got our play of the day up next.